The moving truck hadn't even cleared the end of the block when Mason Holt saw her. She was standing on the porch across the street, one hand shading her eyes from the late September glare, watching him the way you watch someone you weren't sure you'd ever see again. Nora Callahan. He'd known that name since he was 10 years old. She used to ride her bike past his house on summer evenings, no hands, hair loose, completely unbothered by anyone watching, and he had watched. Every time. From his bedroom window. Too shy, too certain she'd never notice him back. She was a woman now, and the way she looked at him across that cracked driveway said she noticed just fine. His son tugged at his hand. "Daddy, there's a glider on the porch." Mason looked at the old wooden porch glider, his parents' glider sitting rusted and still at the top of the steps, like it had been waiting for someone to come back and claim it. He hadn't thought about that glider in years. "Is that our glider now?" Eli asked. "Yeah, buddy." Mason's voice came out rough. "Everything here is ours now. If you've ever had to start over in the one place that knew you before you broke, stay with me. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels." The house was smaller than Mason remembered. He stood at the end of the driveway on Birchwood Lane and just looked at it. A craftsman-style two-story that had been beautiful once probably still was under the peeling paint and the moss creeping up the chimney, and the porch steps that dipped on the left side like they'd been quietly giving up. His parents had bought this house before Mason was born. His mother had filled it with plants and cooking smells and Christmas lights she strung in October, because she always said, "Why wait?" She'd been gone 2 years now. His father 3. "Daddy, is this our house?" Eli was pressed against his leg, staring up at the roofline with wide eyes. 5 years old, all dark curls, and the kind of sincerity that made grown men feel like they had to do better. He was holding Rex, a stuffed T-Rex that had been washed so many times, it was a faded, beloved gray. "This is home," Mason said. The word sat strange in his mouth. He'd spent 8 years calling places home that weren't. Forward bases in Helmand Province where you slept with your boots on. A barracks outside Stuttgart where he'd spent 6 months trying to unlearn things you couldn't unlearn. A 2-bedroom apartment in Charlottesville that Jess had picked out, and he had never quite moved into mentally, even when his name was on the lease. And then after the divorce, a series of extended-stay motels, while lawyers sorted out what Eli's life was supposed to look like, and Mason tried to figure out how to be a father to a little boy who'd spent his first 3 years mostly knowing him as a voice on a phone screen. Home was supposed to be different now. It had to be. The moving company supervisor came around the side of the truck with a clipboard. Tired-looking man, sweat on his collar despite the cool air. "Mr. Holt, we've got everything unloaded. Just need your signature." Mason signed without looking at the list. He didn't own much. Furniture from his parents' estate that had been in storage for 2 years. Boxes of Eli's things, from Jess's house. His own gear, civilian clothes, 2 duffel bags, the sum total of what he'd accumulated in 34 years of living. It hadn't even filled half the truck. "Need anything else?" the man asked. "No, thank you." He watched the truck pull away down Birchwood Lane, taking the last visible connection to his old life with it. The diesel rumble faded, and then Cedar Falls settled into the kind of quiet that only existed in small towns. Birdsong, a lawnmower somewhere down the block, the distant sound of someone's screen door. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood in the haze beyond the tree line, the same as they'd always been, steady and indifferent and oddly comforting. Mason had grown up on this street, learned to throw a baseball in that backyard, got his first and only speeding ticket on the 2-lane road that ran past the high school. Graduated from Cedar Falls High, shook the principal's hand, and drove out of this town at 18, desperate to find something bigger than friendly waves from neighbors who knew your business before you did. Now he was back. He wasn't sure yet if that made him a failure or just someone who had finally stopped running from the right direction. "Daddy, the lady is still looking." Mason turned. Nora Callahan stood on her porch, arms loose at her sides, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that hung open over a faded tee. Her dark hair was pulled back at the neck. Even from across the street, he could see that she was smiling. Not a big smile, just a quiet one, like she was keeping a thought to herself that she wasn't ready to share yet. He raised his hand. "A hello." She raised hers back. Then she turned and went inside. "You know her?" Eli asked. "We grew up together." "Is she nice?" "Yeah, buddy. She is." "Good." Eli tugged his hand toward the porch steps. "Can we go inside? I'm hungry." The lock stuck. It always had. Mason jiggled the key twice before the door swung open with that familiar low creak, and the smell hit him immediately, old wood dust, and somewhere underneath it, faint and fading, the ghost of his mother's dried lavender that she'd kept in little bowls throughout the house. The furniture was covered in sheets. The living room ceiling had a water stain that hadn't been there before. The kitchen floor needed sweeping, and the refrigerator was running, but empty except for a box of baking soda. It was a mess. It was his. "Whoa!" Eli breathed, staring up at the staircase that curved toward the second floor. "It's like a castle." "It's like a fixer-upper," Mason said, but the corner of his mouth pulled up despite himself. "Come on, let's find your room." They spent the next hour going room to room, pulling sheets off furniture, opening windows, to let the September air in. Eli claimed the bedroom at the end of the upstairs hall, Mason's old room, and within 20 minutes had his toys out of the box and arranged with a precision that had nothing to do with any system Mason could identify. Downstairs, Mason stood in the kitchen and made a list in his head. New roof, maybe. Bathroom tiles definitely cracked. Furnace made a sound last winter, according to the estate lawyer's notes. Porch steps need replacing. The glider he didn't know yet. He'd looked at it on the way in and felt something he couldn't quite name. He pulled out his phone to start a budget spreadsheet and stopped. He had $4,200 in savings. A modest pension. No job yet beyond a handshake understanding with a construction foreman 2 towns over. He couldn't renovate. He could barely afford to heat this place in January. But Eli needed something that didn't pack up every 8 months. He needed a school where he'd know the same kids from fall to spring. He needed a father who was present, not deployed, not driving 3 states to a mediation hearing, not drowning behind a smile that was mostly performance. That was worth more than money. Mason set down his phone and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The porch glider out front, the back garden overgrown, the maple tree twice the size he remembered. All of it fixable. Given enough time. A knock at the front door. He found Nora standing on the porch, holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil. She'd changed into a clean shirt. She wasn't wearing much makeup, she never had. He remembered that from high school, when most of the other girls were doing something elaborate with their eyes, and Nora had just always looked like herself. "Hi," she said. Her voice was exactly as he would have guessed, soft, a little low, unhurried. "I thought you might not have gotten to groceries yet. It's just pasta bake. I made too much on purpose." Mason stared at her for a moment, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She held out the dish. "I wanted to." He took it, warmth soaking through the foil into his hands. "Thank you, really." "You're welcome, really." She tucked a strand of loose hair behind her ear, a small, slightly nervous gesture that for some reason made him feel better. "How's the house?" "Like it's been sitting empty for 2 years." She laughed. A real laugh, not polite. If you need help with anything, painting, cleaning, whatever, just let me know. I work from home, so my schedule's flexible. What do you do, Mo? Therapist. Video sessions mostly. It's not glamorous, but it pays. Smart. Sometimes. She smiled. What about you? What's the plan? Still figuring that out. I've got some construction leads. Mostly, I'm just trying to get Eli settled. He glanced toward the stairs. He's 5. He needs some normal. I'd love to meet him sometime. I think he'd love that. He almost asked her to come in. The word was right there. But she was already stepping back, already giving him space he hadn't asked for, but probably needed. Welcome home, Mason, she said. I mean it. She walked back across the street, ponytail swaying, completely comfortable in her own skin, in a way he had never quite managed to be. He watched until she was inside. Behind him, Eli appeared in the hallway. Was that the nice lady? Yeah, buddy. That was Miss Nora. She brought us food. She did. That was nice. Eli considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Can we eat it now? I'm really hungry. They heated the pasta bake in the microwave. The oven worked, but Mason wasn't ready to trust it, and ate on the living room floor because the dining table was still buried under boxes. Eli talked the entire time about his new room and the overgrown garden and whether they could get a dog now that they had a yard. Maybe, Mason said, which Eli had already correctly identified as yes with extra steps. After Eli was in bed, Mason went back out to the front porch and sat on the steps. The glider was right there behind him, creaking slightly when the breeze caught it. He hadn't sat in it yet. He didn't know why. Across the street, a light was on in Nora's front window. He could see her shape moving through the room. She lived alone, no husband, no kids. Her parents had retired to Savannah 2 or 3 years back and left her the house. He wondered what her evenings looked like, whether she was happy, whether she'd thought about him at all in the 8 years he'd been gone. Probably not. They'd never really known each other. Proximity, not connection. She was 2 years behind him in school. Different circles. By the time he enlisted, she was already upstate in college somewhere, and he'd driven out of Cedar Falls without looking back hard enough. But she'd brought him pasta bake and offered to help with the house and smiled at him like she was actually glad he existed. After everything that counted for something he couldn't quite measure yet, the light in Nora's window went off. Mason finished his beer in the quiet and let himself think just for a moment that maybe some things were going to be okay. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were for getting Eli ready for kindergarten, a process that involved locating misplaced sneakers, negotiating cereal choices, and fighting the daily battle over toothbrushing that Mason was pretty sure he was losing in the long run. He'd drop Eli at Cedar Falls Elementary, the same building Mason had attended, same brick, different welcome mat, and watch him sprint through the front doors with his dinosaur backpack bouncing. Then the quiet. And the work. The roof needed attention in at least 2 spots. The upstairs bathroom tiles were cracked through. The furnace made a sound on startup that he'd described to 3 separate plumbers as like an old man who isn't happy about the cold, and all 3 of them had charged him to confirm that yes, it was exactly that. He worked through the list the way the Army had taught him: assess, plan, execute, next problem, and made slow but real progress. Nora kept showing up. Not every day, but often enough that Mason started expecting it. She'd appear mid-morning with 2 coffees and ask what he was working on, and then she'd roll up her sleeves and help. She was better with tools than he'd expected. She could tape a straight line without a level, knew how to patch drywall without it cracking, When it dried, wasn't squeamish about tight spaces or spiders. My dad taught me, she said one afternoon while they were replacing trim in the hallway. Before the furniture plant closed and he had to switch careers, he was old-fashioned about some things, but not about that. He wanted to make sure I could take care of myself. Smart man. He had his moments. They worked in comfortable silence after that. Mason found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. She didn't ask about Afghanistan, about the marriage, about why he'd really come back. She just existed beside him, easy and present. On a Friday afternoon, while they were painting Eli's room, the specific shade of green that Eli had pointed to in the hardware store and called dinosaur green, with complete authority, Nora asked what he was doing that weekend. More of this, Mason said, nodding at the paint-spattered dropcloth. There's a farmer's market on Saturday mornings. Harvest Square. I know it sounds boring, but Eli might like it. There's a honey vendor who lets kids try everything, and a woman who makes these apple cider donuts that are genuinely unreasonable. Unreasonable how? Like you'll feel personally betrayed by every other donut you've ever eaten. Mason smiled. What time? I usually go around 9. Crowds thin out by then. We can do that. Saturday morning was the kind of October day that made you remember why you'd loved a place. The Blue Ridge sat blue and gold against the sky. The leaves were doing their full performance, reds and oranges stacked up the hillsides, like something painted by someone who knew they only had a few weeks to make an impression. The air smelled like wood smoke and apples. Eli was already awake when Mason got up, standing at the window in his pajamas, narrating the neighborhood. They walked the 4 blocks to Harvest Square together. Eli skipping ahead and doubling back in that exhausting circuit that 5-year-olds seem to run on perpetual motion. The market was just as Mason remembered: white tents around the square, local vendors, the kind of gentle commerce where people asked each other how their parents were doing and meant it. Nora was already there near the bakery tent, holding a wax paper bag and wearing a worn canvas jacket, and her hair down, which he hadn't seen before. She waved when she spotted them. Right on time, she said, handing the bag to Eli. Apple cider donuts. Fair warning, I already had one on the way here, and I don't regret it. Eli looked inside the bag with religious seriousness. Can I have one right now? That's entirely your dad's call. You can have one, Mason said, but you're eating real breakfast when we get home. Okay. Eli extracted a donut with both hands and took an enormous bite. His eyes went wide. Oh, wow. I told you, Nora said, laughing. They wandered the market together. Nora seemed to know everyone, the woman selling herbs, the old man with the apple stand, who asked about her parents, and then launched into a 10-minute update about his own, the young couple running the vegetable tent, who thanked her for helping them figure out their licensing paperwork. Each time she introduced Mason not as her neighbor, but as her friend, and each time someone said some version of welcome home, and meant it in a way that settled something in his chest. At a stall selling handmade wooden toys, Eli stopped and locked onto a carved wooden sword, with the focus of someone who had been waiting their whole life for exactly this object. No, Mason said. It's for dragons, Eli said. Still no. Nora, apparently a traitor, bought it while Mason was distracted examining a jar of blackberry jam and handed it to Eli with a wink. You didn't have to do that, Mason said. He needs it for dragons. She was already walking away. That's non-negotiable. Mason shook his head, but he was smiling. They left the market with bags of apples and fresh bread and that jar of jam, and one small boy armed against all dragons. Walking back, Eli ran ahead, and Nora fell into step beside Mason, and for a few blocks they didn't talk, which was its own kind of ease. I was thinking, Nora said, as they reached the corner where their directions split. If you don't have plans tomorrow, there's a park out by Ridgeline Lake. Big playground trails, beautiful this time of year. I go out there sometimes to run. Eli might like it. Mason looked down. Eli had clearly been listening. His face was a full expression of desire and hope. Rex tucked under one arm, the wooden sword in the other. What do you think, Bud Park tomorrow? Yes. Can Miss Nora come? She's the one who suggested it. Then yes times 2. Sunday morning brought rain. Eli reported this from the hallway at 7:15, as if Mason might not have noticed the drumming against the windows. The park was postponed. But after breakfast, pancakes made with actual effort, Eli helping, by stirring too hard, and creating an event on the counter, Mason decided they'd work on the porch glider. He'd been avoiding it. He wasn't entirely sure why. It was just a piece of furniture. Rusted brackets, weathered wood, a couple of bolts that needed replacing. Easy enough. He just kept walking past it. Can we fix it, Daddy? Eli asked, pressed against the window, watching the drizzle. We can try, but I need your help. Eli straightened up like he'd been promoted. What do I do? Hand me tools and tell me if I'm doing it wrong. They were outside in rain boots and jackets examining the glider when they heard footsteps on the wet grass. Nora appeared around the corner of the porch in yellow rain boots and a slicker that made her look completely untroubled by the weather, carrying a thermos. I saw you out here, she said. Thought you might want company and coffee. She held up the thermos. You're a lifesaver, Mason said, accepting it. I'm really just a very consistent neighbor. She crouched down next to Eli. What are we working on? Daddy's fixing the glider. That's ambitious. Want an extra set of hands? Mason wanted to say no. He almost did. But the honest answer was that having help would make it go faster, and having Nora's company would make it better, and he was getting tired of pretending those things weren't true. Sure. If you don't mind getting dirty, my dad was a handyman. Getting dirty comes with the territory. They worked for nearly 2 hours. Nora was as capable as she'd implied, steady when he needed steadiness, patient when a bolt wouldn't cooperate entirely, unbothered by the rust flakes that ended up in her hair. Eli ran back and forth between them with screwdrivers and wrenches and a running commentary that probably constituted more words than the average kindergartner spoke in a full school day. You're really good at this, Mason observed. Nora was sanding down a section of the frame, her expression far away for a moment. He always said a person should never have to wait for someone else to fix what's broken. She paused. He had his moments, like I said. Mason could tell there was more to that story. He didn't push. By the time they finished, the glider was solid. It would need paint to look like anything, but it actually moved back and forth smoothly the way it was supposed to. Eli immediately climbed on and started swinging it with his whole body. Be careful, Mason called. I'm being careful, Eli said, which is what 5-year-olds say when they are categorically not being careful. He's fine, Nora said. Kids are resilient. Mason turned to look at her, at the rust smudge on her cheek, the coffee cup balanced on the porch railing, the way she watched Eli with genuine warmth, and not the performance of warmth. He'd seen the difference often enough to know it when he saw it. Can I ask you something? She said, still watching Eli. Sure. Where's his mom? I don't mean to pry. He's just never mentioned her. Mason had known the question was coming. In Cedar Falls, it always came eventually. Her name is Jess. We divorced 2 years ago, right after I got out. She has primary custody, but she just had a new baby and blended family life got complicated for Eli. So we agreed he'd come stay with me for a while, give everyone room to adjust. He watched Eli pump the glider higher. She's not a bad person. We just weren't good together. We wanted different things, needed different things, and we didn't figure that out. until after we'd already made all the promises. That must have been hard. Staying would have been harder. He glanced at Nora. I don't regret the marriage. It gave me him. But I do regret not being honest with myself or with her about who I was, about what I actually needed. What did you need? He thought about it. I'm not sure I knew. I just knew that playing the roles soldier, husband, provider, all of it at once, I was always pretending. Like wearing a uniform that didn't fit, but telling yourself it did because you'd already committed to the job. Nora was quiet a moment. I think that's brave, she said finally. Admitting it. It took a few years to get to admitting it. Most things do. She looked down at her hands. I spent 3 years with someone who wanted me smaller. Less intense, less emotional, less present somehow. And I tried so hard to be what he needed that I almost forgot who I was. Derek. She looked at him surprised. You mentioned him once. I don't usually talk about him. She shook her head. But with you it feels okay. Like you're not going to judge me for staying too long. I couldn't. I did the same thing. Different situation, same failure. They stood watching Eli in the drizzle, and Mason felt something forming between them that went deeper than proximity. Two people who had both tried to be something they weren't, who had both failed at the relationships they'd thought they wanted, and who were both here in Cedar Falls, Virginia, trying again. Miss Nora, Eli shouted from the glider. Watch how high I can go. I'm watching, she called back. That is extremely high. Daddy, are you watching? I'm watching, buddy. They ate lunch together, grilled cheese and tomato soup, Cameron explaining at length about his upcoming kindergarten start, while Nora listened with the kind of attention that made him feel like the most interesting person at the table, which Mason thought watching them was a gift. Later, cleaning up after lunch, Nora at the sink, Mason drying, she said, Can I ask you something else? Sure. Why did you really come back? I know you said it was for Eli, but was that all of it? Mason set down the dish he was drying. Outside, Eli had gone back to the glider, which now that it moved again, seemed to have become his primary occupation. No, that wasn't all of it. He leaned against the counter. Everywhere else I felt like a ghost, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And I remembered what it felt like to be a kid here. Safe, known, part of something. He paused. I wanted to see if I could find that again. Have you? Starting to. He looked at her. You're part of that. The way you've shown up. It makes me feel like maybe I actually belong here. Nora put down the dish she was holding and turned to face him fully. Mason, I need you to understand something. I'm not just being a good neighbor. I'm not here out of some sense of small-town obligation. Then why? Because I like you. Because when I'm around you, I feel more like myself than I have in years. She held his gaze. And because I think you feel the same way. And I wanted you to know that it's okay to say so. His heart was moving faster than he'd like to admit. I do feel the same way. I just didn't want to push or assume or make things. Weird things are already weird. She smiled. Good weird. The kind of weird where we both know something is happening and we're both too careful to name it. So what do? We keep doing what we're doing. We spend time together. We see where it goes. She picked up the dish towel again. No pressure, no expectations, just honest effort. I can do honest effort. Good. Now finish those dishes. After she left, Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway, Rex under one arm. Is Miss Nora your girlfriend? Mason sat down on the kitchen chair and thought about how to answer that with any accuracy. Would that be okay with you? Yeah. She's nice and she knows how to fix things. Those are two very good reasons to like someone. Do you like her? Yeah, bud. I really do. Good. Eli turned back toward the living room. Can we have the pasta bake for dinner again? Subscribe if you want to see where this goes, drop a comment, and tell me the last place you went back to that surprised you. The weekend cabin trip came up the way good things sometimes do not planned, just offered. Nora appeared around the side of the house one Tuesday morning, while Mason was replacing rotted boards on the back porch, carrying 2 thermoses. My friend Claire has a cabin up at Sycamore Lake, she said, handing him one. 2 hours north. She's letting me use it this weekend. I was thinking if you and Eli don't have plans, maybe you'd want to come. Saturday and Sunday. Just to breathe for a minute. Mason set down his hammer. That's a lot to ask of you. I'm the one asking. That's not how that phrase works. She sat down on the steps. Look, you've been working non-stop since you got here. Eli starts kindergarten Monday. This might be your last real window before new schedules take over everything. No agenda. Just a couple of days at a lake. He looked at her. Why are you doing all of this? She was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the overgrown back garden. The summer before you left for the army, I was 16. My dad had just been laid off from the furniture plant. My parents were fighting every night. I used to sit on our porch in the dark because I couldn't stand being inside. She paused. Your mom noticed. She never made it a big thing, she'd just wave me over. She'd made too many cookies, or she needed someone to help carry something from the garden, or she had a magazine she thought I'd like. Little excuses. Nora looked at him. She made me feel less alone. When I asked her once why she was so kind to me, she said, everyone needs someone to show up for them. Something loosened in Mason's chest. She would have said something exactly like that. She made a difference. So that's what I'm doing. Nora stood and brushed off her jeans. Showing up, like she showed up for me. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he said, Okay, we'll come. The cabin was a small A-frame with weathered cedar siding set back in the trees above the lake. A stone path led down through the woods to a dock, and through the branches you could see the water catching the late afternoon light. The inside was all stone fireplace and mismatched furniture, and the smell of pine and old books. It's like a fairy tale house, Eli breathed. They spent the first evening skipping stones off the dock, Eli measuring his best at 4 skips and announcing himself the champion, which Mason accepted graciously and Nora defended enthusiastically. They made pasta together, Eli carefully setting the table with focused tongue-between-the-teeth concentration. They roasted marshmallows at the fireplace, and Eli fell asleep on the couch before the movie was half over. Mason carried him up to the loft and tucked him in, listening to the sound of the lake through the window. When he came back down, Nora had pulled out the sofa bed and was making it up with extra blankets. Not exactly a hotel, she said, but it works. It's perfect. They sat on opposite ends, fire burned to embers, the lake dark beyond the windows. Can I ask you something? Nora said. Sure. Are you afraid of failing again? The question sat between them. He could have deflected, made it lighter. But something about the dark, the quiet, the way she'd asked it completely without armor, made him want to be equally honest. Every day, he said. I'm afraid of screwing up Eli's life, of making the same mistakes I made in my marriage, of letting down everyone who trusted me. He paused. That's the one that gets me at 3 a.m. That's what being a parent is, she said softly. Being terrified and showing up anyway. A beat. For what it's worth, I think you're doing an extraordinary job. You barely know me. I know you show up for your son every single day. I know you're rebuilding from nothing and doing it without self-pity. I know you're capable of more than you give yourself credit for." Her voice was steady. "I know the parts that matter, Mason." He wanted to reach across that careful space. Fear held him in place, the old fear, the one that had cost him his marriage, the one that lived in the gap between wanting something and believing he deserved it. "Nora," he kept his voice level, "I'm not good at this. Trusting people. Letting anyone in. I held back from Jess for years until there was nothing left to hold back. I'm terrified I'll do the same thing with you." She was quiet a moment. Then she shifted and her hand found his in the dark fingers lacing through warm and certain. "Then try," she said simply. They fell asleep like that hands linked across the narrow space of the sofa bed. Sometime in the night, they drifted together, and when Mason woke to the early morning light coming off the lake, Nora was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, breathing softly. He didn't move. He watched the sunrise lay colors across the water and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. The second day was trails and kayaking, and Eli triumphantly paddling in small circles in the shallow water near the dock, while Nora coached him with a patience Mason could only aspire to. After dinner, he and Nora sat on the dock with their feet above the water, and the stars overhead in the kind of numbers you forgot existed until you got away from city lights. "I need to tell you something," Mason said. She waited. "I'm not good at this. Relationships. Any of it. My marriage ended because I could never figure out how to let Jess in. And I'm terrified that I'm going to do the same thing with you. Hold back until you get tired of waiting." He paused. "But I care about you, Nora. More than I should after a few weeks." She was quiet long enough that his stomach dropped. Then, "I need to be honest, too. I won't be a placeholder, Mason. I won't be the person who helps you heal and then gets left behind when you figure out what you actually want. I've done that before." "What happened?" 3 years with someone who said the right things but never saw me. When he left, he said I was too much, too intense, too invested. And I believed him for a long time. I tried to be less. She drew her knees up. "I won't do that again. I can't. You're not too much." He said it quietly, but completely. "Not to me. You have to be sure about that." "I'm not sure about a lot of things." He reached for her hand, the same way she'd reached for his the night before. "But I'm sure about this. I'm sure I want to try. Not because I'm lonely or because you're convenient, because you make me want to be better. You make me want to learn how to actually let someone in." She studied his face in the starlight for a long moment. Then she leaned in slowly, giving him the space to stay or go. He stayed. When her lips met his, it was soft and careful, a question more than a declaration. He kissed her back the same way, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile and both willing to risk it anyway. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "No promises," she said. "No guarantees. Just honest effort and showing up for each other. That's what I need. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go." They came back to Cedar Falls on Sunday afternoon, and when they turned onto Birchwood Lane, there was a car parked in front of Nora's house. A man sitting on her porch steps scrolling his phone. He stood when he saw the car. Nora went very still. "That's Derek." Eli in the back seat. "Who's Derek?" "Just someone Miss Nora knows," Mason said. "Can you stay in the car for me for a minute, bud? Derek was tall, gym-built, expensive clothes in that casual way that costs more than obvious clothes. His smile when he saw Nora had a quality Mason recognized immediately, the smile of someone who believed his arrival was inherently good news. "Nora, it's been too long." His eyes moved to Mason, assessing. "I didn't know you had company." "What are you doing here, Derek?" Not a question. A statement of its own kind of displeasure. "I was in the area. Thought I'd take you to dinner, catch up." He said it like the most reasonable thing in the world, like showing up unannounced at an ex-girlfriend's house after nearly a year was just a spontaneous kindness. "I'm busy. I can see that." His gaze moved to Mason again. "New boyfriend. That's none of your business." "Fair enough." Hands up, easy smile. 5 minutes, Lena Nora. That's all I'm asking. Mason looked at Nora. "Eli and I will head in." He said it quietly. "I'll be right across the street." He guided Eli inside and didn't go in. He stood on the porch and watched. He could see the tension in Nora's shoulders from 40 feet away. Could see Derek close the space she kept creating. Could see the way Nora's arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself in. He heard fragments, Derek's voice rising, "You're being dramatic. We were good together." And then Nora's hand came up, palm out, clear and final. Her voice carried across the street. "I said no, Derek. I need you to leave." Mason was already down the porch steps. He crossed the street at a steady pace. Both of them turned. "Everything okay?" he said. Derek's jaw tightened. "We're having a private conversation." "Doesn't look very private." Mason stopped beside Nora. "You good?" "Yeah." A beat of relief in her eyes. "Derek was just leaving." "I wasn't finished." "Yeah, you were." Mason's voice was even, not loud, not aggressive, just the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly how much weight it carried. "She asked you to go, so you're going to get in your car and drive back to wherever you came from." Derek laughed. Forced. "And who are you, the rescue package?" "I'm the neighbor, and I'm asking once. Leave." Something in the stillness of it registered. Derek stepped back. Looked at Nora with something that tried to be contempt and landed closer to frustration. "When you're ready to have an actual adult conversation, don't hold your breath," Nora said. He left. The BMW peeled out with the energy of someone who wanted the last word and couldn't figure out what it was. The silence after was heavy and clean. "Thank you," Nora said quietly. "You didn't have to." "I know." She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, but her hands weren't quite. "He used to do this when we were together. Show up unannounced. Make everything about him. I thought moving back here would be enough distance." "What did he want?" "Same thing he always wanted." She laughed, no humor in it. "Control. He can't stand that I built something without him in it." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He's not dangerous. He's just corrosive. Expert at making me feel small and then acting like he's doing me a favor. He's an idiot. He's manipulative. There's a difference." She looked at him with something soft in her expression. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't apologize. You handled it exactly right." Chopped phone. That night after Eli was in bed, Mason got a text. "Thank you again. I know I already said it." He typed back, "Anytime. I mean it. Stop overthinking whatever you're currently overthinking. I can feel it from across the street." "How do you know I'm overthinking, therapist? Also, I'm getting to know you. You go quiet when you're doubting yourself." "I don't have a face." "You absolutely have a face. Very obvious face." "Great. Now I'm self-conscious about my face." "Good. Maybe you'll stop using it to beat yourself up." Mason set down his phone and sat in the quiet of the house listening to the sounds of Cedar Falls settling in for the night. He thought about Nora's face when Derek grabbed her arm, and the way she'd straightened her spine and found her voice in spite of the shaking. He thought about what it took to do that, to confront the thing that had once made you feel small, and refuse out loud to feel that way again. He had a lot to learn from her. If you're still here, drop a comment. I want to know where you're from and whether any part of this feels familiar. Derek came back the next day. Mason saw the BMW from the kitchen window and was across the street before he'd decided to be. This time, Derek had clearly been driving for hours, wrinkled shirt, dark circles, the specific desperation of someone who'd convinced himself that one more conversation would fix what was already finished. He had Nora by the arm, not hard, not violent, but the kind of grip that said, "I get to decide when this is over." Mason ended that sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He positioned himself between them, with a calm that came from years of knowing what real danger looked like, and knowing this wasn't it, but also knowing it didn't need to get there. Let her go. Derek released her, stepped back. Did the whole bravado routine, "Who are you? You'll what?" broken down soldier and Mason let it run out of gas. Words like that only landed if you needed them to. It was Nora who ended it. She stepped around Mason's, eyes blazing, voice shaking, but not from fear. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up and act like you have a claim on me. You don't get to grab me or make me feel guilty for building a life you're not in." She took a breath. "I spent 3 years letting you make me feel small. I'm done. If you come back here, I'm calling the police." Derek's face went through several things. Then he left. The silence was different this time, not just relief, but something final. Nora stood very still, arms around herself. "You okay?" Mason asked. "I will be." She exhaled. "I can't believe I let him get to me." "You didn't let him get to you. You faced him. That's different." He rested his hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Nora. Really good." She turned to look at him, and there were tears, not broken tears, more like the kind that come after you've held something too tightly for too long and finally loosen your grip. "Thank you for being here. Always." That night, she came across the street and sat down beside him on the porch steps, shoulder to shoulder, the neighborhood dark and quiet. "I need you to understand something," she said eventually. "I'm not fragile. I don't need to be rescued from my history. What I need is a partner, someone who trusts me to handle my own battles, but shows up anyway, just in case. That's what I was trying to do. I know. And you did it perfectly." She took his hand. "I can take care of myself, Mason. But it's nice to know I don't have to do it alone anymore." "You don't. Not anymore." They sat there until the street was fully asleep. Eli was already dreaming upstairs. The porch glider moved slightly in the breeze behind them. Mason looked at it. Thought about what it had cost to come back here. What he'd been afraid it would feel like and how much different it actually was. He thought about Cameron's question. Eli's question from that afternoon. "Are you good for Miss Nora?" He made himself a promise he intended to keep. The weeks that followed built themselves into something Mason hadn't expected, a rhythm that felt sustainable. Eli thrived in kindergarten, coming home each day with evidence, a worksheet about the letter E, a drawing of a dinosaur that he insisted was Rex, but which Nora diplomatically described as impressionistic, a best friend named Tomas who had the same opinion about crunchy peanut butter. The house transformed room by room. Nora showed up in ways that accumulated coffee on mornings when Mason was running on 4 hours of sleep, picking Eli up from school, when a job interview ran late sitting on the porch after dark while Cedar Falls slept. It was easy. That was what scared him. "You're doing it again," Nora said one evening in late October. They were painting the living room, Eli asleep upstairs, and Mason had gone quiet for 15 minutes. "I got a call today," he said, "from a company up in Richmond." "What kind of call?" "Project manager position. Major commercial construction firm. Good money, $94,000 a year. Almost double anything I'd make working local." Nora's expression didn't shift, but something in her eyes did. "That's a real opportunity. It's an hour and a half away." He climbed down from the ladder. "I'd have to relocate. Take Eli, start over again. Or commute, leave Monday, come back Friday. Which means being gone most of the week." "What did you tell them?" "That I needed to think about it. That I needed to talk to some people first." He held her gaze. "I needed to talk to you." She was quiet, not avoidant processing. He'd learned the difference. "Is this what you want?" she asked finally. "The job. Part of me thinks it's stupid to turn it down. I could actually give Eli a real college fund. Fix everything that's wrong with this house. Build some financial security for the first time in my life." He paused. "The other part thinks being here matters more than the money. That stability isn't a number." "Where do I fit in that decision?" It was the question he'd been circling. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "But I also don't want to be the guy who turns down a career because of a relationship that's only been real for a few weeks. That's not fair to either of us." Nora set down her paintbrush and walked over to him. "Forget fair for a second. Forget the logic. Be honest with me, do you actually want this job?" He thought about it. Really thought about it. The money was real, the advancement was real, but when he pictured himself managing construction sites in Richmond and living in some furnished apartment through the week, what he felt was just tired. "No," he said. "I don't. I want to coach Eli's Little League team someday. I want to know which vendors at Harvest Square are worth stopping for. I want to sit on that glider at the end of the day and have it mean something." He looked at her. "I want a life that's here. Present. Not big and absent." "Then tell Richmond no." Just like that. Ethan Mason. She almost smiled. "You're not afraid of a smaller life. You're afraid that wanting it makes you less. That choosing something real means you gave up." She stepped closer. "That's not giving up. That's finally figuring out what you're actually after." He pulled her close and held on for a moment, his chin at her temple, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with paint. "When did you get this clear about everything?" he said. "Graduate degree in psychology." It came with the diploma. He called Richmond the next morning and politely declined. The relief was immediate and complete. A week later, he found a posting for a facilities manager at Ridgeline Memorial Hospital. Decent pay, full benefits, the kind of work he could do well managing maintenance crews, solving infrastructure problems, keeping an aging building functional on a finite budget. He sent in an application. 2 days later, they called him for an interview. The hospital administrator was a veteran herself. When she saw his service record, something in her demeanor opened. "You're overqualified for this," she said, at the end of the hour, walking him out through the facility. "But something tells me you're not looking for the biggest opportunity. You're looking for the right one." "Yes, ma'am." "Then it's yours if you want it." He started the following Monday. Within a week, the maintenance staff trusted him not just because of the service record, but because he listened before he directed and solved problems without making them political. The administration appreciated that he communicated directly and didn't invent drama. And every evening, he was home by 5 to pick up Eli from school. Nora noticed the change almost immediately. "You look happy," she said one evening while they were making dinner in Mason's kitchen, Eli in the living room, constructing what he called the tallest block tower in Virginia. "I am happy." He looked at her, really looked at her. "The job's good." Eli settled. "You're here." He paused. "Everything I wanted is right here." She smiled, but something was still working behind her eyes. "Can I ask where this is going?" she said carefully. "Us. I know we said no pressure, but I need to know if you're thinking long term." He turned to face her fully. "I'm all in, Nora. Completely. I'm thinking about Eli calling you something other than Miss Nora someday. I'm thinking about a future where you're not just across the street, but here in this house, in this life." Her eyes went wide. "I love you. I'm saying I love you. I want to build a life with you. Not someday, now. Starting now." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know it's fast." "It's fast," she agreed. "I know we're still figuring things out." "We are. But I've never been this sure of anything." Nora's eyes filled. "I love you too. I've been trying not to say it because I didn't want to scare you off. But I love you, Mason. I love Eli. I love this messy, complicated, beautiful thing we're building." He kissed her deep and certain, and felt something shift permanently inside him. Behind them from the doorway, a small voice, "Are you and Miss Nora getting married?" They pulled apart, laughing. "We're working on it, bud." "Good," Eli said, entirely satisfied. "Can she read me a story tonight?" "I would love to," Nora said. By January, Nora's lease was coming up. "I'm thinking about not renewing it," she said one evening. They were on the porch glider. Finally, they used it every night now, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill. "I want to be part of your everyday life, Mason. Not just the parts you invite me into. I want to wake up here, help with school mornings, be a real presence for Eli." She looked at him. "Only if that's what you want." "It's exactly what I want." He didn't hesitate. "It's been exactly what I wanted for months." She smiled. "Even though it's fast. Especially because it's fast. I've spent too much of my life being careful about the wrong things." They told Eli at breakfast the next morning. He processed this information with his full 5-year-old seriousness stirring his cereal. "Then, does this mean you'll be here every morning, even for school days?" "Every morning," Nora said. "Can you make your special pancakes?" "Within reason." Eli threw his arms around her neck with the full commitment of someone who has made a final decision. In the spring, Jess called. She and her husband were relocating to Portland. Would Mason consider letting Eli come for the whole summer, 10 weeks, give him time to bond with his half-sister, get comfortable with the new city? Mason stood on the porch, while Nora read nearby, his chest tight with the math of it. A whole summer without Eli. 10 weeks. But Eli deserved that relationship. Deserved to know his sister. Deserved a mother who was present even if it meant Mason had to learn how to be present in a different way for a season. He called Jess back and said yes with one condition. He and Nora would fly out for at least 2 weeks during the summer. Jess agreed immediately and suggested making it 3. When he told Eli, he framed it as an adventure. Plains Pacific Coast, baby sister. Eli's eyes went round as quarters. "Will you be sad without me?" "Every single day," Mason said honestly. "But I'll also be so proud of you for going. And I'll call every night." "Promise, promise." In June, they dropped Eli at Dulles and watched him walk through security with Jess' backpack, bouncing Rex tucked under one arm. He turned back once to wave enormous grin, and then he was gone. The house on Birchwood Lane was too quiet that first evening. Mason wandered through the rooms. Nora found him in the hallway and pulled him to the couch. "I know," she said, "but he's going to be fine, and so are we." She was right. The summer became its own kind of gift, morning runs, together spontaneous drives up to Sycamore Lake evenings that didn't have a schedule. They visited Eli in July and again in August, and each time he was fuller of stories of confidence of the kind of kid who'd been given space to grow in more than one direction. When they picked him up at Dulles in late August, he ran into Mason's arms and held on. "I missed you so much, Daddy." "I missed you too, buddy, so much. But I saw the ocean, and baby Lily smiled at me, and I swam. Tell me everything." That night after Eli was asleep home in his room, Rex in the crook of his arm, Mason found himself on the porch glider. Nora came out and sat beside him, shoulder against his. "You okay?" "More than okay." He reached into his jacket pocket for the small velvet box that had been there for 3 months, waiting for a moment that earned it. "I was thinking about us, about Eli, about this whole year." He looked at her. "I don't want to wait anymore." He opened the box. The diamond caught the porch light and threw small lights across her face. "I know I pre-proposed at Christmas, but I want to make it real." He slid off the glider to one knee on the porch boards. "Nora Callahan, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Eli's whatever you want to be to him and my partner in all of this? Will you choose this messy, complicated, beautiful life with us?" She was crying and smiling at the same time, which he was starting to understand was just what her face did when something was completely right. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." From inside a groggy voice, "Daddy, Miss Nora, what's happening?" They both laughed. "We're getting married, sweetheart," Nora called back. A pause. Then Eli very seriously, "Can I be in the wedding?" "You're the most important person in the wedding," Mason said. "Okay," satisfied. Then, "Can I go back to sleep now, please?" they said at the same time. They got married in October. Exactly 1 year after Mason had first pulled up to Birchwood Lane with a moving truck and a duffel bag and a 5-year-old who needed a home. The ceremony was in the backyard, the maple tree blazing gold above them, the porch glider visible from the aisle. Eli walked Nora through the back gate, suited up with the seriousness of a diplomat, his grin giving him away completely. Mrs. Vasquez officiated. She'd gotten ordained online and presented this fact to Mason as if it were the natural conclusion of 40 years of teaching English. Half of Cedar Falls showed up: Diane from the Blue Ridge Diner, the honey vendor from Harvest Square, Mason's old construction foreman neighbors, who'd watched the whole thing happen through changing seasons and had decided it was worth celebrating like a personal victory. When Mason said his vows, he didn't use notes. "I came back to Cedar Falls broken and lost, and trying to figure out how to be worthy of a kid who deserved better than what I had. You showed me I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be present. You showed me what love looks like when it's steady and chosen and real." His voice cracked, and he let it. "I choose you, Nora, every single day, for the rest of my life." Her vows were simpler. "I choose you too, through the hard days and the easy ones, through the doubt and the certainty. Through all of it, I choose this life we're building, one day at a time." When they kissed, Eli cheered louder than anyone. At the reception under string lights in the backyard, Mason danced with his wife and thought about the long road that had brought him to a Wednesday night in Cedar Falls, Virginia, with his son asleep inside and his neighbors raising glasses and the mountains dark on the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked, her head on his shoulder. "How close I came to missing all of this, because I was too scared to try." "But you did try." We both did. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes clear, her expression, the one he'd come to rely on the way he relied on the sunrise. Yeah, she said. We did. The music played on, and they stayed on the dance floor longer than necessary and didn't apologize for it. Mason looked up at the October stars, the same stars he'd watched from this yard as a boy, the same stars he'd navigated by in the desert when he was trying to find his way back to something he couldn't name. He'd found it, not the life he'd planned, not the impressive, ambitious, legible life he'd told himself he was supposed to want. Something better, something real and chosen and present. A house on Birchwood Lane that needed work and got it. A son who talked too much and not enough at the same time. A woman across the street who had shown up with pasta bake and the nerve to say what she meant. A porch glider that moved again. That was enough. More than enough. That was home.